Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start. My name is Lynn Ramey, and I'm delighted to have everybody here to hear Maxime Durand, who will talk about, he's from Ubisoft Montreal, where he went, Montreal is where he also went to school at the University of Montreal, and where he got his BA in history, and then he immediately started working for Ubisoft, where he's been for the past 7 years, and he works exclusively on the Assassin's Creed series, so he's very knowledgeable about that, but also about the company in general. I also, we're going to take this one little moment to say that he's a part of a conference that we're having over at the Center for Second Language Studies tomorrow, all day, and it starts this afternoon, evening, here in the Digital Humanities Center. And you're all invited to that as well, but that's on using immersive environments, i.e. video games, to learn dead languages and culture. Like, what can we do now to make things more interesting for our students? So with no further ado, Maxime.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Super excited to be here. So I've been trying to follow PK Subban on his way to Montreal from Montreal to Nashville. So if you know about hockey, he used to be one of our star players in Montreal, and he got traded for a very good player, which is called Shea Weber. Nothing to do with the conference. I'm very, very excited to be with you guys here today. So this is a conference that I've been giving for a couple of years now, in universities, high schools. So I adapt every time to the audience. I try to, at least. So excuse me if there are parts that are boring. If there are parts that are interesting, well, I'd like to know about it in the end if you want to come and talk about it. Obviously, you've probably heard it at this moment. My first language is not English, it's French. So I'm a French-Canadian from Montreal. So if there's anything that's not clear, please take the time to raise your hand and stop me and just ask. Or if it's not clear for you, maybe it's not clear for someone else in the room. So hello. All right. So today's conference is going to be in 3 parts. I'll try to stick to 1 hour. Am I right? Something like that. So the first part is the boring part, where I tell you like useful stuff like how to get a job or how I got this job. And then the rest is just candy, explaining how I work at Ubisoft, what we do on Assassin's Creed. And I said 3 parts. And then, oh yes, talking about the problematics of being a historian working on a video game. I guess that's the biggest chunk of today's presentation. So, without further ado, I hope this laptop is going to run quick enough for us today. Is it? All right. So you already know that by this time that I've been working at Ubisoft since 2010, since I graduated. The main games I've been working on are Assassin's Creed 3, which was released in 2012, and Assassin's Creed Unity, which was released in 2014 about the French Revolution. But basically, I've been working on every project from close or from afar. Video games, so Brotherhood, Revelations, up to last year's Syndicate, and also side products. So we have now comic books, novels, youth novels. We've got a movie that's coming in 2 weeks with Michael Fassbender. I'm super excited about this. I haven't seen it yet. So yeah, I've been working on pretty much any project or also side projects, which I'll be talking about briefly today. All right, you can do it, laptop. I guess I get used to my work computer, which is like a super bomb, very very efficient, and this is not. All right, so is anyone here haven't ever played Assassin's Creed or doesn't know what Assassin's Creed is? Don't feel shy. Raise your hand. So just so that I know, what are your expectations? Anyone never played a video game here? Raise your hand. All right. Oh, usually when I say Candy Crush, it's the last hands are down, so it's okay. All right. So, but just quickly, I'll still recap, maybe faster in this case. But Assassin's Creed is a video game. Basically, it's started off as a video game series on consoles. So, talking about the Third Crusade in the Near East, we tackled after that the Italian Renaissance. We went into Constantinople, Istanbul for the Ottoman rise. Then moved on. Well, it's not in the chronology of how we made the games, but historically how it's made. So we also have side games about Imperial China at the same time. We did the Golden Age of Piracy in the Caribbeans, also the Maroon Rebellion in the Caribbean as well, which was a DLC. We've talked about Louisiana and the colonial era in the 18th century, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and last year we released a game about Victorian London, year 1868. There's nothing going on in 1868, but it's a pivotal moment as a matter of technology and events on what was happening before and what's happening after. So, what is Assassin's Creed basically? I'll use a lot of the examples from Assassin's Creed 3 because that's also the link with where I started off at Ubisoft. So Assassin's Creed basically, it's a fight between two secret societies, Assassins and Templars. They're not good guys, they're not necessarily also just bad guys because they're studying themselves to death most of the time when they have a problem, so let's assume that they're not only good guys. There are two different ways, they have two different ways to see society. So Assassins are more about liberty, Templars are more about rigid, so thinking that society needs help to survive or to develop itself, where the Assassins are really more about freedom and like human is good and it's going the right way without directions. So it helps us to talk about very two different spectrum to be able to talk about our subjects. A lot of people, I don't think, see that when they play the game. They just have fun, and that's all right. But that's the narrative behind. So basically, we started off with a character that's called Desmond. So that guy looking a bit numb at the top there. He was in the present day, so as a real character, and he's put into a technology that's called the Animus. So in that case, that's the chair. So it's based off the idea that maybe we could have like a historic background into our DNA. So the Animus is not able to read all the DNA, so it needs someone, a player, to go back into the Animus. It's not a travel through time, it's really a simulation, and then to play these events to fill these blanks that are in the Animus. So a lot of things that we explain in the game, like mistakes, are called as the Animus, like simulation problems. And it's, in a way, you'll see why it's true. So most of the time, the core of the game is about the main character, so either Connor, Altair, Aveline, so different characters in these historical eras that I've talked about a little bit. And in the case that I'll be talking a lot about today, it's the American Revolutionary War, so that was in AC3, so the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War, and the American Revolution. So there's always like the core, the Animus, then you have the characters, the setting, and so, is this going? Sorry. Just a bit more of context with the AC3 in this case. No, didn't happen. No, I did not succeed. Please, let's go back. Right. You can do it.
Peggy 18.
All right.
I have known true freedom. I have known a world of peace and remarkable spirit.
Maybe I'll just skip it. I'm sorry. If you want to see it after, I'll put it back on the laptop. So it's just a explanatory video about the Connor Assassin's Creed 3 and his Native American village. All right, getting the job. How I've got it. Woo! How and what are useful tips that I can give you at this moment. So what was Ubisoft looking for, and how it happened? Actually, I was studying for my terms, like some of you are doing right now. I think exams are starting on tomorrow. And then I saw that later, passing through the Department of History, that Ubisoft was looking for a historian. Basically, what is on the left is exactly the words that they had in that letter, with like just fluff around it, with like commas and stuff like that. But basically, they were looking for a historian with good knowledge, historic validation, very quick and professional, dynamic, who's able to transmit, to synthesize, and bilingual. So that was good. I had almost my paper in my pocket that I had a degree in history. That I was working towards that. To prove that I was dynamic or that I could transmit that information, I tried to make the point with them from the start. I called in like 2 minutes after I saw the letter. I called Ubisoft. That like I'd worked in student associations, had been a museum guide, I was a competitive sportsman. So just to prove that I was someone ready and willing to do something, and I had experience to back it up also to prove them. And I think that was the best part in all of it. Just as I said, I contacted them very quickly. Well, yeah, of course you have to think about what you're going to say, but it's important to show that you're interested if there's a job offer, for instance. And bilingual, well, and in the case of the game development, because we're based off in Montreal, but Assassin's Creed is developed worldwide, you at least need to speak English, but it's better to be bilingual because a lot of team members are francophones as well. But on Assassin's Creed 3, we did a survey, and we had 23 different nationalities on the team that are, I mean, first-hand immigrants. So the spectrum of what people know about history or culture is very, very different. So it's very important in this position to be able to understand other people's perspective and to try to come up with solutions that are accurate for everyone. So that's the part where you can mock me. That's what I looked like when I was in university, so long hair, like a weak beard, something like that. It's just, don't discourage yourself. Keep it up. But it's also an experience of when I went to Ecuador to teach Spanish and English to people that were, their first language was Native American, it was Quechua. And so they probably didn't learn much because I was a 2 weeks experience. But for me, it really was changing a lot. It really changed my perspective and on different trips. So what Ubisoft was asking at that moment was for someone to know about the French and American revolutions, because when they hired me, they didn't know if it was only going to be the American Revolution or the French Revolution. Their spectrum was so wide, they didn't know. So, all right, that's 18th century was the field of expertise that I had, even as an undergrad. I was really interested in medieval history, but in the end, I preferred that way. Maybe because it was easier. I don't know. They wanted someone who knew about the First Nations. That was something I had studied that was very interesting also. If you're in Montreal, it's also not problematic, but on a daily basis, it can be a taboo because we have Native American villages like 5 minutes away from Montreal, and in the 1990s we had big problems in between the cultures, like they had to bring in the military, just like for many silly reasons, but anyway, it was something I was very interested in working with. And basically, Ubisoft was looking for someone who could talk about daily lives, transports, mentalities, architecture, environment, basically everything. I knew I didn't know everything, but I was curious and able to tell them that I was interested in trying to find the answer for them. So that's what they were looking for, basically. They were asking for me to go from science and knowledge to entertainment, basically. So my role, ever since, has been to search, to inform the team, to support them on their curiosity, to verify if what they do or what they want to do makes sense in any way, and sometimes to have fun. Like, I agree, I play every day the game. Probably wouldn't have much fun when playing a game in development because it's all gray and nothing works properly. That's why, I mean, we create these games on long-term. A game like Assassin's Creed is developed through a range that's about 2 to 4 years. So depending on the moment you're going to play, it might be very different also from the beginning product to the end product. It's probably very different because sometimes we change a lot. But it still is it's nice, it's fun. We don't save lives. We just make games. What it looks like on a daily basis, there's no day like another day. Like every day is different, you never know. I'd say the closest thing to that maybe is like police officer. You don't know. You don't know before you get there. But that's the end of the comparison. All right, so that's what I do most of the time. So in this case, this is Boston. So that's one of the historical maps that we've used. So part of my job is to do that, to look at these maps, to find them, to make them accessible for the team. So I'm sorry for the two people in the room who may have heard this earlier this morning, but my work is like being a teacher for my students, which are the game developers. So they want to make a fun game, they want to make an entertaining game. My goal is to give them the tools to do them and to help them encompass on the way they're going to do it. So finding maps like these, finding a topography also on how the maps evolve. So in this case on the left, the blue sections are it's very technological, but it's the stuff that has been added over Boston through time in between the moment that we created the game and the moment that we were trying to represent. So just to make the team understand that they couldn't rely much on actual Boston to recreate it from the colonial version. Just for instance, the land filling that was done was partially done with the mountains that they cut, the tree mountains. So there's a ward that's called Tremont. Well, it came from the mountains that they dug, which was after the game. So I had to find ways to find the topography, the heights of these mountains. I think it was 85 meters. So it's not much, but still, even today in Boston, even with the skyscrapers, you can still see that little slope and that slide in the city itself. But that's the kind of information that you have to get as a historian working on the game. If the moment you want to represent is very different. So if I compare when we did Constantinople, Istanbul, it had changed, and we didn't have much knowledge on the city as it was when we were trying to reproduce it. But still, most of it was, the landscape is pretty much similar as it was back then. It didn't change that much because most of the monuments were there still. Boston, New York, it's changed so much that you couldn't rely on the actual city. So paintings, engravings, artifacts like drawings on cups in museums, that's the kind of information that you want to get to try to reproduce these moments. So I mean that's the only representation we had of one of the dams that they created in the mill pond, it's called, even though it was from a later era. And then that's the result. On the right, that's the game map. On the left, it's one of the maps that we've used. There's a lot of information on these maps that we can think about. Like on the left, you have the depths, but also the tides. And that inspired us. We were thinking, like, can we create a technology with the tides in the game where, like, maybe if the tides are low, you can push someone and then he gets stuck in the sand, because that's what happened to a lot of people in Boston who died in low tides. It's like, in today's perspective, it seems a bit silly, but in the death record, it's like there's a lot of people who died there, actually. So we thought, can we do it as a technology? So history also impacts the gameplay. In this case, we decided not to because the cost of doing it, the technology to do it was just too high for the actual results. But also, if you look at it, the proportions are about right. But our goal here is, with Assassin's Creed, is not to recreate 100% everything. And we could not, even if we wanted to. So if you look here, you have these red dots, these red squares, I'm sorry, everywhere. They're scattered. The closer they are, these are landmarks. The closer they are, the more problematic it gets for us. So all of these places have unique landmarks. So these buildings they only have one occurrence in the game. You only see them once. So someone, an artist, a modeler, did that building, and it costs in the memory, in the game memory, in the rendering. And if you have a lot of them at the same place, it's very high. It's very demanding for the engine. The more scattered they are, the better it is for the engine. But then also for gameplay purposes, if you want to have you create a map, you invest time in creating this map, you want to make sure that there's something interesting for the player everywhere. Because otherwise, like here, there are no landmarks here. Why would the player go there? You have to make sure that the storyline also brings the player there, because, so you see there are many, many things that are going at the same time. It's not just about reproducing a game map. It's not just about making a documentary. But also the choice that we make for creating these landmarks are based off if they are interesting for the narrative part, for the history, or if the events that occurred there was interesting as well. So like the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, you just couldn't miss it because that's part of the plot for the American Revolution. It's like, it's central to it. What else? Like here the wharf, you just couldn't miss it also. But some of these landmarks, it was more a matter of like that's scattered through the map. All right, so not too much sleeping, people, right? That's the said wharf. So if you go in Boston today, you can still be at this precise place. It was, I think it's a mile or 1.6 mile long, and it still is today's limit in Boston, where you have the aquarium just over here on your left, and you can still see that view to the old State House just over there, which looks like nothing compared to the skyscrapers added today. But if you were an immigrant, and a lot of people that came in the US from Europe, they passed through this very precise place when they went into the colonies. So they would come here, and that's what we did with the players also. The first time you get to Boston in the game, you arrive here, you hear the news, so people talk about what's happening in the revolution or the events. So that's what we have the AI to record, people to record. When you go up front, you have taverns, just like you would have at that moment. So it's not just about recreating a background, it's also about the experience, the immersion that you get as a player when you get there. So it was a defining moment. When we have that information, when we can find that into the process of making the game, then we can add that into our narrative, into the gameplay. It impacts the way we have the game. So the more information we get, the better the chances there are that it's going to make it into the game. Not everything, we have to make choices, but it's interesting. All right, this one is probably not going to go very fast as well. That's the part where I can really brag about my job, is going on trips with the team. It's very interesting because we can see these sites. We can also confront our vision of what we want to create, also with reality, because there are things that you don't see on picture, feelings that you don't see on pictures sometimes. The luminosity, this is something that with every game, we work with on the way we represent these environments, the lighting, the angle of the sun, depending on the season, the layer of dust in the air. These are all things that my colleagues, my artist colleagues and technical colleagues are very aware of. And like, they want to make the best looking game. I want them to make the most historic game. Obviously, I'm not going to win that fight, but I try to do it as much as I can. Part of my job involves that I work with historians, professionals. I said my field of expertise was 18th century, but my real field of expertise is working with the team, with the people in the development team. So we hire people. The one on the top left, is François Furstenberg. He's an 18th century colonial specialist. He used to be one of my professors at the Université de Montréal. I think he's at Brown now. And so a lot of these people are specialists from the different eras. We hire them, so they come inside the team for consultancy. They review the script, they review the environment sometimes. So we ask them tricky questions also. So things that would take me a very long time to try to answer on my own, I ask them. Also, these people are very interesting because they help us understand the historiography, the way that things are going to be perceived in how we reproduce our game. So this guy here, he was the reviewer of the script on Assassin's Creed Unity. So I think he reviewed it 3 times. First time he was saying, like, you guys are royalists if you put that game out with the script as it is. And so that's the perspective we want to have. Maybe we're going to go onward anyways, but we want to know what we're throwing ourselves into before being in the wolf's mouth. So we work with community experts, especially when talking about sensitive subjects, sensitive issues. So that's Theo Musante, Thomas Deere. It's a Native American consultant that we had, one of the many that we had on the project. So we visited sites, communities, working hand in hand with these people to make sure that we try to make things right, especially on that subject of Native American history, because it is so sensitive. And again, because we live close together in Montreal, it's like, there are no reasons for us to make big mistakes on this. Even though we make our game, they do their stuff, but there's no reason for us not to work hand in hand with these people. We work with recreation music groups, so every music that you hear in the game obviously has been recorded by real musicians. Oftentimes we will record also their we will motion capture their body. So when you see people in the crowd playing instruments, they're real people. We work with weapons experts like Mike Loads, like very vocal guy. If you look at the Terrible History channel, I think he's there like pretty much half the time. But he's very good. He's very good for consultancy because he gets to the point. That the weapons inspired us a lot on Assassin's Creed 3, for instance. The reloading time, but also being able to make the team understand that using guns in the 18th century colonial America is not the same thing as a first-person shooter. It's not. And so it helped us in a way because that's how we develop the gameplay mechanics of the archetypes in the game. I'll talk about that a little bit later when I'll show you the archetypes. But everything, as I said, everything that we can try to learn might help in the way that we're going to make this game, not just on the visual, but also on the core gameplay mechanics. So sometimes we'll work with history fans. This was with the team when we visited Colonial Lexington and Concord. So every year they do like a reproduction of the battles that started off the war. So we recorded that. We tried to my goal was really for the team to understand what was happening there, what's going on, what they look like, so to break their fantasy a little bit, so that they could understand. An example of what we do. Here is New York. That's Wall Street. You recognize that, right? How we create that, for instance, is using multiple subjects. So for cards, I used a lot of material from Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia because I know they do their stuff right. So why not use everything that they do, their resources, to help the team understand what cards look like, to make them believable. Most of the architecture is gone, but because we were reproducing a part of the city that was New Amsterdam, we used architecture from Amsterdam, from the same era. City Hall in New York, which is the building that you have on the right. Oops. Sorry. I'm skipping too fast. All right, that's Trinity Church, which was destroyed during the American Revolution. So again, that specific event where the city of New York burns was very big on our scenario because we couldn't do two versions of the city. That's just too demanding. So we had to keep the player from going into that portion of the city firsthand, and then we did a mission where the city burns in that part, and then you can go in it after, and it's all burned down, which was true. But again, because we could find that information, we could try to do it in the game. It's not always like that. These are good examples. Obviously, we could be shut out for many other bad examples of things that we did big discrepancies on. But I'm trying to give you examples here of when it went well, and also when history can be useful. So to recreate St. Paul's Chapel in New York, we just simply used the plans and looked at the history of the monument, so what was there, what wasn't. So like the spire, I think was the biggest addition that wasn't there during the Revolution. Painting, so within the team what I did is that I hid the spire, so they only used the building. In the game, what it looks like when you create it with a wireframe, it looks like this basically. And then you just had the texture. That's simple. No, I'm kidding. It's really a lot of work. I'm very admirative because I have the easy part in this. My job is a diplomat's job because I do the research and then I try to convince people that it's right. But truthfully, that's the hundreds of people in the team that are working in creating these. I mean, that person doesn't see the game as much as I do. That person, this involves about 3-4 persons. So the person that will model the monuments, the gray version, then the person that will make sure that, normally it's the same person, but sometimes it's two people that will make sure that you can climb everywhere, or if you cannot climb, there's a good reason you can't. And then the person that will texturize also the monument and make sure that there's a reflection also in the windows, the glasses. So it's collaborative work, but my job is easy. Sometimes when the building already exists, I just have to backtrack and see if there's something very different. Very cool stuff about this monument is obviously that it survived, and with its specific location, it's even more insane that it's one of the only monuments that we have in New York that survived from the colonial era. despite that it was just beside ground zero. So today it's more memorial about the victims, the firefighters especially. All right, I have a video next, but I doubt it's going to happen, which is a shame. Will it? All right, second try. All right, every time I see this, I still have the shivers. It's been about like 5,000 times I've seen it. I still, there's a lot of pride, obviously, when a game is released because you've been working on that for such a long time, and it's again, you only see small bits of it until it's the end, and then when everything comes together, it's a very powerful feeling. All right, more examples. That's from the Bastille in Paris. So just again, using as much visual evidence as possible, also literature evidence to be able to reproduce it. Challenge here was that you can see a lot of reference from outside, but then you don't see much from inside. And also for the artist that worked on this, she worked on this for like a year and a half to reproduce it in the game. It wasn't visual enough yet. So the process that she did is that she looked at what the French Revolution TV series, so it's like a 4-hour TV series that was shot in the 1990s, what they used to reproduce, how they reproduced the Bastille. They actually used another castle in France that exactly looked like the Bastille. I think Tarascon is the name of the castle. So she used that reference also. So sometimes even using the other people's work in research can be very useful. So we have to be still very open. What it looks like in the game, again, the same process of modeling that huge building, doing the track so that the navigation is right, and then with the final process with the texturized version. So here is another challenge. In the French Revolution, we only did one city. It doesn't evolve through time. The American Revolution was different because you had events. We prevented the character, for instance, from going into places where it shouldn't happen, or people were at the right place at the right time. Here we have a huge sandbox that's only one city. It's on a smaller scale, let's say, but higher. So we decided, for instance, that the Bastille was a monument that was being torn apart. which happened. So during the French Revolution, on the next day, the next day after the storming of the Bastille, they started to remove the Bastille from the place because they thought it was a symbol of the old regime, and so they reused the stones to create many more monuments, such as I think the Concorde Bridge in Paris. So because in the game we can only reproduce one step of the landmark, we had to decide, was it going to be full, was it going to be like torn apart already, because most of the game takes part after that, because that's the starting of the French Revolution is when it's being taken over by the population. In real life, the monument doesn't exist anymore. That's just, it's a boulevard over there, like it's a circle in Paris, if you've ever been there. Like you go there, oh, it's the Bastille. There's nothing. It's an opera house. So the fantasy was much better to have this monument in the game, even though it was a discrepancy, an anachronism, than not to have it. So that's why we also did this process of having both steps.
You mentioned a year and a half. Are you saying that it took a year and a half to create this one monument?
Yes. Notre Dame took 2 years for the artist to do it. It's one artist who did it, to recreate it. Then there are other people who do the process of creating, for instance, blocks that are being used, textures, but the person that builds it up, like a Lego block, is one person for a year and a half. And yeah, for Notre Dame it was 2 years, and she had never seen Notre Dame before. And I was there with her when she saw it first after the release of the game, and she was almost crying. Because she was like, oh, I should have gone here before. It would have been much easier. Of course, she thought it was beautiful. It's really amazing. The monument is amazing itself, but still. Another example of what we do. It's not something that we did in the game. It's just a comparison. On the right, you have reality. Tourist's picture. You have the right proportions. And on the left, it's the same subject, but from an artist's perspective. There's something very different in these two, is the emotion that's being conveyed. On the left, he doesn't respect the constraints of the proportions or realism. On the right, it's only realism, but there's no story told. So I'd say Assassin's Creed is pretty much in the middle of these, trying to use good proportions, even though we adapt them to our game, but also to convey this feeling. So that's why sometimes we'll cheat. Oftentimes, actually, we'll cheat because we want to convey this message. If you were in Paris during the French Revolution, obviously there's chaos. Every day wasn't like that, and then a lot of people commented on this, and it makes sense. They're right, and like it wasn't. You didn't feel threatened every day that you walked in Paris during the Revolution, but the days that did happen were very bloody days. Thousands of people got in jail or killed or beheaded. That was the feeling that we had to convey, that you felt like you were in a part of an event. All right, a quiz. Which is which? So if you think the real one is the one on the right, please raise your hand. I'm the live one. Sorry? This one. If you think this one is the real one in real life, raise your hand. Right. If you think this one is the real one in real life, please raise your hand. Some people haven't raised their hands yet. All right. Anyone wants to try on explaining which one is which and for what reason? Yep.
Just going to go for very simple. This one looks just a little shiny, a little polished. Looks created. That one, not so much. The one on the left looks. So
that's the fake one. That's the real one. Okay.
That'd be wag.
All right. Let's give it a second try in the back.
The one on the left has a slight glint on the sun, so you can kind of feel that it might be more of a real photo versus the one on the right, which doesn't have that, sun glint. It feels very, very ambient lighting.
All right. Last person.
The one on the left, under that little roof thing, the shadows are more interesting. Like they're more complex than the shadows in the one on the right. So I think the one on the left is real.
All right. I'm just pushing the suspense a little bit more. These were very good comments. It's the first time I have these 3 comments. So very good comments. The first clue I can give you is that on the picture on the left, there's much more diversity in the glass, in the stained glass, than on the right. So on the left, it was made by hand. On the right, it was made by a computer. So we cannot reproduce that in real life. It's insane. And then the other clue is the navigation pole here. You don't need that in real life. Usually you don't climb there. So but as you can see, sometimes it's very challenging to tell the difference, even though the constraints, the metrics are different. All right, a game is not only about building, it's also about crowds, feeling. So using a lot of books about producing animations and jobs. So for instance, shipyards in Boston were super important. There are a lot of crazy people in real life who are trying to recreate real ships. So that's very useful for us. Again, like a history enthusiasm. Again, Colonial Williamsburg on the left with a printing shop, or the Encyclopedia of Diderot d'Alembert in the French. That was Wikipedia, obviously, way before Wikipedia, with same different bias. But for us, it was pretty useful to use to create 18th century, 19th century material, because we had drawings, we had explanations of these jobs. We could see a lot of diversity, not only what we thought was right, but really have a good explanation. All right, this one's a funny one from AC3. On top, you have the game archetypes without the heads, because that's rendered generically. And in the bottom, these were some of the examples that we used to recreate these, some of the things that are very striking to make the comparison with. So on the top left, with the game character, you have the snitch. That was inspired from the boys that were the drummers in the American Revolution. It inspired not only the visual, but also the gameplay. So the snitch doesn't fight in AC3, but you can kill it. And because we don't encourage, we never let the player kill kids, otherwise you desynchronize. We made it as a youth, a beardless youth, or like a young adult, but in real life they were kids. So when you get rid of the snitch, you prevent that he gets more reinforcement troops, because the idea is that drummers, they were helping the beat, they were helping with the fight. If you killed normally nobody shot at them, but if you kill them, obviously it would destroy the morality of the troops. So that's the idea behind how we used it in the game. The rest of the other characters, they're just based on their strengths, their weaknesses. So the Brute, for instance, was inspired by Grenadiers. Obviously, we knew that these people, these troops, didn't wear a kilt. After like 3 days that they got into colonial America, they were like, no, this is so useless. Same with the Bear Fur hat. They didn't wear that very often. They got rid of it very quickly to more useful. Yep.
What's the soldier in the middle in the gray?
This one?
On top.
Okay, so that's the same guy. They're my memory is pretty bad on the name. They were frontiersmen, like scouts. Basically, so you always had scouts that were going in alone, or like 2-3 people before the troops. But also, to come back to the Grenadier, you get the point. These guys were mostly taken in the troops because they were bigger and taller than most of the other soldiers, so they had their own regiment of big, tall guys. So for us, it's very simple. I'll just finish with this, and then I'll come to your question. And on the right here, the super archetype in our game is the Eschen. So basically, we played with the fact that the German mercenaries that were brought into colonial America were seen as the most fearful fighters. That's not real life. But even back then, they were seen like that because they spoke German, because they were strangers, and they had a reputation that was with them. So that's the only reason why we took this guy, not because we thought that was true.
So in the game, after you basically beat most of the game, like the street patrols turn into American street patrols, but like the archetypes are basically
The same.
Replaced by the blue. Is it true in real life that the Hessians, after the American Revolution, just decide that you're still going to stay in America?
I'm not a specialist. I don't want to, and my memory is too bad. But I know a lot of, what I can remember is that a lot of them, ever since the start of the war, when they arrived in colonial America, they fled. They deserted the army. But that's all I can remember, truthfully. But you're right, for the colonial troops, like the American side, they were just skins. They were just colors, based on this. And again, the goal wasn't for the player as a Native American who, like the Mohawks usually sided with the Redcoats. The goal wasn't to kill Redcoats and not Americans. That was never in our mind. And marketing campaigns in the UK and the US are different. So you can see that the two videos are different. They don't see the same. They don't show the same perspective. But in the game, you quickly realize that it's not about that. But sometimes you see marketing is it's very important for us. Obviously, people wouldn't know about our games and they wouldn't buy them. So I wouldn't have this amazing job. But you always have to be careful also on what you see. Some things that helped us in creating our characters. It's the same time with every character. There's always that. We find a way to put the hood on, to put some of the symbolic icons of the assassins. But in this case, we use pictures from museums, from books. This is Guy Johnson, so the nephew of William Johnson that you actually kill in the game. Well, he was like William Johnson was superintendent of the Indian Affairs. I think Guy Johnson took over his job after he died, and then he used this ceremonial clothing. Here for the painting, but for us it was useful still to understand that this is the kind of fantasy that was portrayed in the time period that could inspire us to make our characters. So Connor, you can see a bit of the melting, plus all the fact that you want this character to be super powerful. I always compare him with he's like a quarterback mixed with O-line and D-line at the same time. He can do everything. He's like super agile, strong, but his weaknesses are also that he's like a paladin. In the fantasy gameplay, he's very he does what he thinks is right, but he's not super wise also. So that's the kind of character you see. You see the influences. I don't even know if these are claws or tooths on his necklace, but they're from the bear. Basically, like if you look on the internet, and we don't have the answer because I don't think we thought about that when we created the character. I think they're claws. The bow and the arrow, obviously we knew that by the time of the American Revolution, they weren't much in use anymore, and that's because it's also part of one of the reason of the downfall of the relationships with the Native American, with the Mohawks, at least because they were trading guns with them against belts, and they got into that killing spiral. But in the game, we needed a weapon that was stealthy, and obviously, like muskets aren't everything but stealthy and useful. So we gave him the ability to have pistols, the bow, the tomahawk, which is a very iconic weapon. Sadly, it's still a very iconic weapon, even in the U.S. military. But that's how we create these characters. All right, more characters. George Washington. Just like with the landmarks, when we create these characters in the game, we cannot reproduce everyone. They have to be relevant with the history that we're going to talk about, like the historic events, their narrative. They have to fit in with the story. Washington isn't a no-brainer. Obviously, he had to be in the game. The challenge was more what he was going to look like, which sounds ridiculous because we have his death face mask. We know George Washington, right? You have him in your pocket on a daily basis. And that's the challenge, because we know George Washington with his big jaw, but he didn't have that big jaw, like the big mouth in the American Revolution, or in even less during the French and Indian War when we were trying to portray him. He was a kid. Does he look like? So he had like tooth problem at the end of his life, and mostly we know the iconography from that period, and so it's challenging for me as a historian to tell the team, let's do him like he was during the American Revolution, while all of the iconography or people's expectation and perspective or what you see here. So we have to be very thoughtful about this. Benjamin Franklin, He was our Leonardo da Vinci, except he didn't invent any weapon. But it was a no-brainer. He's like one of the most important scientists in the 18th century in Europe and in America also. So he was recognized widely, a very political character. But it's a challenge because people were expecting that we would have Leonardo da Vinci too. So a guy that's multi-talented, that creates weapon, art, politics. So there's this super fun comic strip, like it's five images. I didn't put it here. I should have, but there's like when people learned that Franklin was in the game, they did this little comic strip where Connor gets to meet him, and he gives him like a turkey fryer because he actually fried a turkey with electricity. That's his deadliest weapon. All right, Charles Lee. Last but not least, that was my favorite character in history for the American Revolution, and my least favorite character in the game. Because when you look at him, when you look at his bio, have you ever heard about Charles Lee before playing Assassin's Creed 3? Maybe a little. I didn't knew him. I wasn't a specialist of the American Revolution, especially. And then I got to know about him and about his tragedy, because he was very important. He was amazing, but he had the bad idea of being having a very strong personality, and his main enemy was George Washington. So he lost that fight. The political fight. But as a leader, as a military leader, he was much more interesting than Washington. Nothing to compare here. So he was. As soon as we saw him, it felt like he could be a good villain, because his purpose is right. He left everything he had in Europe to come to the American Revolution, basically to do the fight. And he lost everything in the end, and he died alone in a tavern. So it's pretty sad. Like for 2 years, he was alone in his house. He had removed the walls, and he drew them with a chalk on the ground. So he was became a psychopath. So he was a perfect character for the game. In the end, it's not easy to portray him in the same way, because he's a Templar, so that's the mix with our narrative and history. It was a bit harder. All right. Another example of how can we create or recreate history without always recreating not stereotypes, but mistakes from the past, or we don't want to convey old stereotypes. Maybe I'm not choosing the right words, but at least I'll try to explain to you. Aveline was a character that we created for 18th century Louisiana. And so, because she was a woman, because she's Métis, because she's half black, half French, it was complex, but we wanted to make it right, to do the challenge of creating this character, a woman character, first-person character, in a historic context, with purpose and power. And so we created the three personas. So we created gameplay specifically for her. We could say, let's just put a character in a historic context and we don't care, like it's a woman, we don't care. I think our first step was doing that. Maybe our next step is having a strong female character and not caring about the fact that in history, women are portrayed in this manner and men are portrayed in this manner, and often men are more highlighted with history. We don't want to be stuck in that stereotype, but it's a challenge also for us. So for Aveline, we created this character. I'll go very quickly with the visual, but where she has these three personalities. So you see what it looks like from geometry to in the game. But these three personalities is that you can play as three different archetypes. So either you're a courtesan, you're the assassin, or you're playing as a slave. So each has constraints. Each has, like as an assassin, obviously you have to be stealthy. As a slave, well, you cannot go in places where a slave wouldn't go. As a courtesan, well, your clothes are preventing you from navigating or fighting. So we really created a new gameplay with this, and it was very well received. So at first it was made on the PS Vita, so a mobile game, and then it was ported into a main game because she was kick-ass. Everyone liked her. So it was good for us that the community was open also, because we want, even if we want to be leaders, the answer has to come from the people who are playing and buying the game in the end. All right, I'm about done, but just a few more examples. And this one maybe is going to help Lynn with writing, with ancient writing.
So, question about the characters.
Yes.
How long did it take to model the characters, including the clothing?
For the main character, I'd say it's an ongoing process that's about 2 to 3 years, because we're never satisfied until it's too late to change it, oftentimes.
So it's about the same amount of time as it is for a major piece of architecture.
Yeah, as for making the whole game, actually. Because the game, as long as the voices are not recorded, every voice that you hear in the game has been made by an actor, played, his gesture has been recorded. Until that time until we record, we can still change. After that, we have to stay with what we have. So with the main characters, it's hard because everyone has their opinion on what they should look like, and we want to please everyone, but it takes a long time often to get it perfectly right. So it changes and evolves a lot. For historical characters, like side characters, I'd say maybe sometimes we get it right on the first time. Sometimes, like George Washington, it took over a year and a half also, so that we find a satisfying compromise. So the example here is 2 things. That's Excel sheets, timelines. In this case, these are historic characters and where they were in the world at what moment and what they were doing. So we try to find lines here that would make sense. And here it's just a bunch of folks that die with the year that they die and what could be their alignment, like Templars, Assassins, just high level. So we do first pass, then we make a list, and in the end we decide, okay, like these guys are interesting, let's keep these guys, because when you make a game about assassinating people, obviously you need people who die. Real people as much as possible, otherwise we make them up. The example on top is François de la Serre. So if you played Assassin's Creed Unity, it's one of the first characters that you get to meet. So he's Elise's father. He was, I found him in the death record in Versailles. So I think for 2 or 3 days, or maybe it was a week, I can't remember, but I looked into the digital archives there online. So I looked at these until I found, oh, this guy's perfect. He's a nobleman. He dies in Versailles at a perfect time, just before the beginning of the French Revolution. Okay, let's find more about this guy. And then we realized there wasn't much more to learn about him unless going to like paper archives. And so it was perfect. It was a character with not much background, but with a good name at the right place. Let's create a character out of him. So you see where we play with history. So maybe he wasn't a Templar in real life. I don't know. Historical events, just to give you an idea, every game is different, the way we approach it. That was the case of Assassin's Creed 3. We had a lot of historical events because that was the main focus. But some games have much less because, as I said, like with Victorian London, there were no historical events of record in that year when we made the game. But the technology and the setting was right for that precise year. So it was more about the story of the characters than about historical events. That's a very, very early prototype that I did on Assassin's Creed 3 when we were creating the ships. So at that moment, the water was they were only cubes moving like this. And we were creating something from scratch, and I had a challenge to try to explain to the team how we were gonna create this. What you would hear with the AI, with how the technology, the gameplay would work also. I didn't know nothing at that moment about sailing, also that didn't help. Here the funny thing is that the mainmast is behind the wheel because we tried it just in front of the wheel like it was in real life, but with the player's perspective, you don't see anything. And the fantasy is to play with the boat, to control the boat. So that's the kind of thing that we do. We remove, so that ship that wouldn't really work in real life, possibly. But still, the technology, the people that you see on the deck, the things that they say, it's very shortened sentences because it was very complex to man a ship like this. The command lines were super long and complex. But we use these sentences, we cut them down, trim them as much as possible, and that's what you hear in the game. All right, a few last things. Because we do all of these historical anachronism, we try to bring to straighten the facts. So we've been, ever since the first Assassin's Creed, integrating the encyclopedia, the Animus database, so you can find more information. Obviously, one of the things that really worked with Assassin's Creed is not to teach history through the game, but to make people curious about history. So a lot of people have been touring a lot of places in the world now, a lot of the cities that we've done, and saying, hey, I've seen this, I know this. Kids with their parents, they tell them about the history, not the inverse. So on the funny side, because of that, we've been part of the popular trends. Obviously, don't study Assassin's Creed before a university lesson. Maybe you're not going to succeed. But that's part of it. There's that guy, it's very funny, he recreates our games maps in Minecraft. Like, that's meta, very meta. All right, and that's the last eye candy. I'm sorry, it's probably not going to work the way I wished it did. It's just to prove that you can, maybe there's a way in the future to reuse these games, stripping away the violence. That's a video I did. So just to show the city how it is. I'm sorry. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions that people would like to ask. We have a few minutes, and then I think I need to go eat.
Yes.
But yeah, just a couple of few questions. Go ahead.
Yep. Go ahead. Sorry.
Were there any historical influences in the music you put into it?
Yes. Oh yeah. It's a balance. I'm not on the audio team, but I know part of their process is that they look at the instruments, they look at what they can find as a historic music, and then they also try to mix the urgency feeling or the emotions that they want to portray. Let's compare with a movie. Like you have very short experiences where they have you like go through different emotions. So they play with the music, they play with the lighting, they play with different aspects. It's the same with us. If there's a need for urgency, then the drum is going to go faster, things like that. But yeah, there are instruments, historical instruments, or music sources go through the process. We've tried a lot of different things with the Marseillaise, so the French Revolution song. It was bad, so we didn't use it. But for over a year, I heard like electro mix of the French Revolution with pop culture. It didn't work out very well, but we try at least.
Thank you. This is fascinating, and I want to frame this question not at all as any type of like nitpicky or anything. If you could help me, so I work in history. I'm also a parent to a young artist, graphic designer, gamer who happens to be a young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed on your slides on the team, I saw it mostly men. But then you talked about some of your designers working on Notre Dame and the Bastille. Not necessarily just with your team and with this company. Could you talk a bit about gender and how things may be changing or not in these types of things? Because I look at the audience too, that there are a lot of people, it doesn't matter what gender they are.
I'm sorry if, not as an answer, but I'm sorry if I may have given the impression that it's only men. It's not the case at all. I think about a third of the team are women on Assassin's Creed. At least at Ubisoft, there are a lot of diversity in gender, in ethnicity, in religious beliefs. We put it at the beginning of our game. It's the first disclaimer, and it's true. It's still a majority of men. Most of the, I'd say, even in programming, there are women, but mostly men. For the rest of the every other field, modeling, writing, it's men, women. It's present.
As well as time
I think it is.
I think as recently
Yeah.
as 5 years ago, it tended to be sort of the guy thing, even though so many of the gamers were girls. But are you seeing, are you projecting that would continue to change into?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And there are more initiatives now than there was before. So just with a lot of my colleagues, a lot of the women that are in video games, maybe half of them, are very interested in promoting video games for women. So they are part of game jams, or even Ubisoft is promoting a lot of events like that. So they offer time from team members to create games with younger adults, younger women, for instance. I could give you a reference after that if you want, but yeah, it exists, and I think it's a trend that's ongoing because there are less boundaries. Women feel like they are more integrated in the process. Also, it's right. But internally, I've never seen that. At least at Ubisoft Montreal, I've never worked anywhere else in any other studio. I've never seen a barrier with that. So.
Thank you so much for this great talk. I know you have a short amount of time, but I was just curious. I mean, you have a really unique job and job title in particular. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit of like how you define your professional identity. I mean, I'm sure you work with a lot of different groups. You've described yourself as a diplomat, I guess. And I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about maybe some of the struggles or like balances of having to define yourself professionally, and kind of what sort of career path do you see for this? Like what's kind of next, I guess, for someone in your position?
Thank you for the praises, and again, thank you everyone for being here. It's interesting because you are there. I hated my job first 3 months. It was the worst job ever. When I left university, I was sick of history, to be honest. I wanted to do something practical. I was so tired of having to fight over like the length of a mustache, you know, because in that writing it was written like this. That's super important. In a way, that's super important. That information, that struggle, that historic struggle is the basis of what I work on, the things that I use to make these games. But I didn't want to do that myself. I wanted to do something practical. It took me a while, maybe a year, to get comfortable with this job. With getting comfortable with the process also of understanding who was doing what in the video game industry in my team. That the people I have to spend more time with at the beginning are the directors, so that these are the decision makers. But I didn't knew how the game was going on. I didn't knew who was important at first. And then the more you go into the process, the less the directors are important to me, the more the different team members that are creating the game, like people actually doing it, they are getting more important, because when someone asks you, what are the flags that we're going to do in the game, that's not a director's decision, that's a modeler's decision. So every person becomes very important. So the first year I was struggling a little bit, and I was keeping my sources at first. I was like tracking my sources. After 2 weeks I stopped. It was insane. It didn't make any sense. The amount of data that I have usually on a game like this is between 65 and 120 gigabytes that I keep just for the historical record, and then every team member does research. So I just couldn't keep track of the sources, and at some point I realized maybe nobody's going to ever ask me for them. Maybe someone will. So I kept everything, but it's not as clear as it would be for academics. Now I'm feeling more comfortable with, much more comfortable with the profession, with the work. I'm not the only one at Ubisoft. We're 2 full-time historians on Assassin's Creed. In Paris, we have a dedicated team that's I think I've said it earlier, but they work with all the projects. So we have historians and other professionals over there also that work full-time. Reality of next steps. Are there gonna be more historic video games in the industry? Not at Ubisoft, but everywhere. I think so. I think it's not only going to be video games that are made by big companies, but also a lot of games made by students. I think that's even where we should go. Creating games that's cool, because you get to learn about programming, you get to learn about team working, about a process of creating a project, which is usually more engineering than history and then humanities. So I think that's where the crossing will happen. I think it will happen very, very soon. I think here it's already in place. In my university, it's not there yet because it's so traditional. I spoke last year with the head of the university. I was very lucky. We had an interview and he asked me, what would you change? I said, at least add programmation into the history curriculum. That's the minimum you can do. Even though I know it's complex, like everyone wants to add stuff. There's not much time, and we're being told that students are lazy and they handle more. I think a good thing with video games is people, when they play, or when they create them, they're very interested in what they're doing, and because they're interested, they will apply themselves to do it. They will do it with dedication, and if that merge still continues and goes deeper, I think it will happen. I like my job now. But it's my job. Another question?
We probably better stop.
All right. Thank you so much.